feasible for the council and I to meet together physically. And due to the safer at home orders, all council members are participating virtually. Would the city clerk please call the roll?
Councilmember Larson.
Present.
Councilmember Clark.
Here.
Councilmember Mundy.
Present.
Councilmember Scippio.
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Adams.
Here.
Councilmember Taylor.
Present.
Councilmember McIntosh.
Here.
And Councilmember Burke.
Thank you very much. We are televising this meeting live on TV 13, and copies of the agenda and videos of this meeting will be available online on the city's website. You just click on Watch Meetings Online link. Council members, obviously this is an exciting time for us to come together. As you know, we do this every 4 years as we begin a new 4-year term with the city council and myself. It's important for us as we come together to set our strategic priorities for the next 4 years. It's important for the staff as we provide guidance to them as they prepare the work programs to ensure that the work programs are in line with your objectives and my objectives and our priorities going forward. And certainly it's important for the citizens of our city as we work to address those areas that citizens feel like the city should be focused on. We're fortunate that we do have two very strong pieces of information or data that are available to us. First of all is the citizen survey that was completed by almost 1,300 individuals, which gives us information with almost a 95% level of confidence. Then, of course, there were 5 focus groups conducted by Ms. Ferguson and her staff that gives us additional information as we prepare our priorities. Now, the purpose, as you know, of these sessions is to create high-level priorities. As the city manager would like to stay at the 10,000-foot level and not delve into specific work items. The staff will take what we do over the next 2 days in terms of broad priorities and develop more detailed objectives and work programs that will come back to us for our review. I understand from the city manager that the time frame for that is geared towards us adopting a final plan in May of this year. So I'm looking forward to this discussion, and let me turn it over to our city manager, Lee Garrity, for any comments and to introduce the team that we'll be working with over the next 2 days. Lee?
Thank you, Mayor. Good afternoon, Mayor Joines, Mayor Pro Tem Adams, members of City Council. This is an exciting time. This is the most important document that you as City Council created. It is your plan, not staff's plan, where you as a group come together and identify, what are the highest priorities? Where do we throw that next dollar? Where do we focus our attention? And it'll make a difference in our budget and just in our alignment of our activities. So it's very, very, very important. We're excited to work with you on this. As the mayor said, we'll be coming back to you to develop all those specific action plans. In addition to bringing to committees prior to that, Mr. Tesh and myself will be doing some one-on-ones with all of you to make sure we're hearing from you, make sure there wasn't something that we're misinterpreting before it comes back through committees for adoption. But we're looking forward to this. It's an exciting time. It also kind of helps that we have a little money for a change, which is maybe the first time in my career I can remember that. But in any case, I'm going to turn it over to Scott Tesh. He will introduce Michelle Ferguson and get us started. Scott is our Performance and Accountability Director. And Scott, please lead us through it.
Thank you, Lee. So good afternoon, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, and members of the City Council. As Mr. Garrity said, my name is Scott Tesh, and I'm the city's Performance and Accountability Director for anyone who might be streaming this or watching the recording later. I have the distinct pleasure this afternoon of introducing Michelle Ferguson from Novak Consulting. Novak Consulting was selected through an RFP process in the fall And she and her team were selected based on their extensive experience in local government strategic planning across the country. And they came very highly recommended by management staff in multiple cities and counties in North Carolina, including Raleigh, Wake County, and Durham. I believe all of you have talked with Michelle previously on the phone. In addition to those one-on-one meetings, as the mayor stated, she and her team facilitated 4 focus groups and the public input session that took place earlier this month. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Michelle and allow her to introduce her team. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. Mayor, members of the council, it really is a pleasure to be with you this afternoon. If I could stand on my tippy toes, I think I could see you all from my home in Durham. It's not quite the same, not being in person with all of you, but it is great nonetheless. And as the mayor said, this really is an exciting time. It's been a hard year, which I think is an understatement for many people. But this is an important opportunity for this governing body to spend this time today and tomorrow really reflecting on the year as it has been and the year that you hope will be true over the coming year and throughout the next several years. So spending time together as a governing body, really talking about what your collective priorities are going to be very critical. And I certainly applaud you for taking this opportunity, albeit a little bit different, not how those of you who have done these strategic planning processes before have probably done them in the past in a Zoom way is a little bit different, but nonetheless, I have no doubt based on my conversations with each of you and my work so far with the staff that this is going to be a very productive 2 days. With me today are 2 colleagues that I wanted to introduce to you. First, it's the box next to me, so I have no idea where that box falls on your screen, but Kelsey Engelking is with me, and she is going to be helping sharing the screen as we do polling tomorrow. She will help with that. And then also on the screen, you see a white screen somewhere in your Zoom boxes, and that is our graphic facilitator, Julie Giesecke. And if you have looked through, although I won't ask you to raise hands, those of you who have looked through the summary report from the focus groups, you will see some of the results of the work that Julie did as a graphic recorder who really helps bring words to life during the focus groups. And she will do the same both today and tomorrow. So I really encourage you, not that looking at each other's faces in the boxes isn't going to be exciting, but if you need a little visual break, you can go ahead and click those 3 little dots next to Julie's on Julie Giesecke's box, and you can highlight her box if you want to watch her again bring your words to life throughout our time together. It's exciting, and we capture what you all talk about, and as you saw in the focus group summary, the results of many of the visual captures that Julie will do over the course of the next 2 days will become part of the record for our time together today and tomorrow. So because this is a virtual environment, there are a couple of different norms, and I'm going to invite Kelsey to share her screen. We do have a PowerPoint that we are going to use throughout these next couple of days, but I'm going to try to the extent possible to not share our screen, because I do want to create as much of a natural, normal, sitting around the council chamber kind of conversation for all of you over the next 2 days. So while the norm has been to always keep those mics muted, certainly during presentations for the council, I encourage you to keep it muted. But when we're engaging in conversation, again, the idea is for this to be as conversational and as natural as possible. So please feel free to unmute as long as you can control any background noise that you have. The nice thing about Zoom is I do have the power of the mute button. And so if I hear some background noise that's really interfering with the conversation, please don't be offended if I or one of my colleagues uses that to help make sure that people can hear the conversation. To the extent possible for the governing body, I invite you to keep your cameras on. Again, this year has taught us that we are working from all kinds of different places. Some of us are are in our homes, some of us are in offices, some of us are, who knows where you may be with virtual backgrounds, we don't know. But we invite you to keep your camera on where possible, although there is really one important rule. If any pets, children, or other household family members or coworkers show up on your Zoom, they are required to be introduced. So just know that going forward. We will be using what is new technology. I said, for those of us who haven't had the virtual experience for strategic planning, this will be a little bit different. And we certainly encourage you to offer each other and us a little bit of grace as we use some new technology both today and tomorrow. If, however, you have any concerns or problems, please don't hesitate to stop us and ping one of us. We want this to be a positive experience for all of you. So I know you all are veterans at Zoom meetings at this point, but if there are any issues, please don't hesitate to raise them. And then finally, I will encourage you both today and especially tomorrow to be bold. This is a unique opportunity that you all have to really engage in conversation with your colleagues about what your individual priorities may be and how collectively this governing body wants to spend its time and its energy over the coming several years. And so I encourage you to be bold as we start talking about initiatives, but also I will encourage you to stay at that 10,000-foot view, as the mayor and the city manager said. Keep that high altitude perspective. We will absolutely get down into the weeds. I know that'll happen as staff develops action plans after the time together. But for the conversation, certainly for the conversation today as well as tomorrow, staying at that 10,000-foot level, staying at that high altitude, I think is really going to help all of you identify where your collective priorities are for this council. Just very quickly, in terms of the agenda, you all had in your packets information that included the specifics, and I asked you to do a little bit of homework. Again, I won't ask you to raise your hands to see who did that, but I will ask you some questions as we go through the next 2 days. In a moment, I will invite the council to introduce themselves for the record. I know you've already done roll call, but also to share some expectations you may have. We will, well, actually, we can't talk about the future, I think, without having a little bit of conversation about today's reality in the hopefully soon to be post-pandemic environment that we are in. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. We'll also, from staff, have an overview of the strategic planning process. As the mayor mentioned, we will talk about the community input that was received both from the resident survey as well as from the focus groups that our team conducted. And then we'll do just a little bit of visioning to close out today's agenda. As a preview for tomorrow, we'll talk about this at the end of today, but tomorrow's focus is really going to be on talking about the existing strategic plan initiatives, progress that's been made on the existing initiatives, and then allowing each of you the opportunity to share some of your individual priorities that you are interested in talking about with your colleagues. So with that, that's a bit of our kind of an overview of our agenda. And what I'd like to do now is invite you to go around, and I'm happy to call on folks. You can certainly, as I said, I want this to be as conversational as is possible in this environment. But I'd like you just to go around. We'll do quick introductions among the council, and also I'll invite you to share an expectation, one expectation that you have about this strategic planning workshop and the time that you all will have together. Mayor, I will always offer you the option of going first or last if you have something else that you wanted to add.
Might as well go first. Thank you. I have a very high level of expectation that the council and I will be able to develop a very comprehensive and exciting and forward-looking strategic plan, working with the staff that will help guide our decisions over the next 4 years.
Thanks, Mayor. Mayor Pro Tem Adams.
Yes, Dee Adams of the North Ward. My expectation is that we leave out with at least a short list of 1, 2, 3 successful things that we can do now included in the strategy that will render results, positive results, and with input from the citizens.
Thank you. Councilmember Larson.
John Larson, South Ward. Southern Living just classified us as one of the top 10 progressive cities in the country, and I want us to be that in the next 10 years. So we've got to keep it going forward.
Thank you. Councilmember Clark.
Two comments. First, I think staying at a 10,000 level, we need to avoid, I think, getting too much in the weeds on COVID. We know the swimming pools were closed last year. We don't need to talk about opening the swimming pools. That was a COVID type of event versus other things in parks and recs, for example. And secondly, I think we have a lot of very noble goals in mind, but somehow we need to be able to quantify or define goals or strategic plans so that we know how to implement them. You know, we all want world peace, but name 4 things we can do to do it is what I'm getting at. Anyway, thank you.
Councilmember Mundy.
I'm Kevin Mundy, and one of the newer members of council, just joined in December at my first foray into public service as an elected official representing the Southwest Ward. I'm going to ride on Ms. Clark's coattails and say, yeah, we have to be realistic, but my expectations are also, this is one of the few times that we can talk about what if budgets weren't an issue, what if we didn't have to worry about pleasing every segment of the population. And it's an opportunity to kind of look at green fields and blue skies and be somewhat, I can't think of the right word, but looking to the future and what we might be able to accomplish, and then start putting some reality checks on that. But if we never get out there to that point that we look at what if and the blue skies, we don't always consider what could be some really great ideas.
Thank you. Councilmember Scippio.
You're muted.
That's such a challenge with Zoom, is just to get the mute button unmuted. This is a great opportunity. Hello, everybody. That's what I was saying, that it's great to be together again. My expectations is that we will be very thoughtful in our ideas. We'll be very creative and find a way to make Winston-Salem a very unique city for the future. That engages every aspect of our community, all of the people, and tap into our different resources and maximizing them. And again, I remember when in 1964, we were the all-American city. And I think we have to have a vision of where we want to be for the future of this city. And I hope our discussions will help us get to that point.
Thank you. Councilmember Taylor.
Good afternoon. My name is James Taylor. I'd like to start off by saying, as always, I'm a native son of the city of Winston-Salem, and I have the honor and privilege of representing the area that I was born and reared in. So it's something I take very seriously, something that's very important to me. My goal for today's meeting is just to take the input from our citizens, galvanize the input from the members of the council, and use that information to provide productivity and continue to move the city of Winston-Salem forward.
Great, thank you. Councilmember McIntosh.
Good afternoon, Jeff McIntosh, Councilmember of Northwest Ward, serving my 3rd term. My expectation at the end of this is to have a better understanding of the minds of my fellow council members, especially the newer council members who I've not had as much opportunity to spend time with. In our past 2 sessions of this, we have come out with, I think, things that we could all agree on. We didn't all agree on everything, but I think we'll come together with a package that we can all feel very good about and very comfortable about pushing forward.
Councilmember Burke.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Councilmember Burke, and my expectation for this strategic planning session is for us to share our ideas and mindset about what we believe and feel to be the high priority needs in our city, and for us to develop a comprehensive strategic focus that will have the greatest impact on the needs of our citizens.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all very much for sharing. I think it's helpful to start with a collective understanding where each of you are today. And I appreciate the comments made by Councilmember McIntosh about wanting to hear from each of you and get to know your colleagues a little bit better. It has been a different environment, obviously, in the last year. And as governing bodies change, it's important to be together, even if it is in a different environment, and understand where each of you is coming from and what your individual and as well as your collective priorities are. So as I mentioned at the beginning, it is difficult to talk about the future without some recognition of the environment that the community faces today. And as you will hear, and when we talk later this afternoon about the focus group feedback, certainly the pandemic is very prevalent in the community's mind, as I'm sure it is on all of yours as well too. And so we wanted to spend a little bit of time this afternoon giving each of you an opportunity to talk as a group about how this pandemic has impacted your role as elected officials, the interactions that you have not just with each other as a governing body, but also with the community, and certainly with city staff who is there to support the policy direction that you provide. And then also here, as I think it'll lead into some of the conversation we have about specific initiatives that are important to each of you, to hear what's on your radar today. What are some of those items that perhaps you had not given thought about prior to the pandemic, but that are pressing on your mind today in this pandemic environment? So the first question that I invite you to think about and to share your thoughts on are how has the pandemic affected or impacted your individual view of your role as an elected official? And I won't call on you individually. You're welcome to unmute yourself and share your thoughts.
At first, this is Councilmember Adams. This is my fourth term on the city council, and that's like Councilmember Taylor. I was born and raised in the city of Winston-Salem and have lived in my district for over 50 years, almost 60. At first, my role was to always make sure that I worked with my constituents as well as staff and business partners. And, don't get me wrong, I can say that now this is all drastically changed. The players are the same, the partners, but it's changed. Now it's like it's COVID, it's no jobs, it's housing, it's homeless, it's physical, mental illness, it's small business, it's equity, it's social justice, it's jobs, training, education. It's all of everything in like a tsunami coming at me as a public official. And I try to do the best that I can in my role, but now I have to work on all of these issues at the same time and look for always trying to respond with corrective and preventive action to all the people and players involved. I would be remiss to say that it's draining. My job before COVID it's my passion even now, but now it's more than a notion, because every day I wake up, there are more phone calls, more emails, more calls for me to do something a whole lot more than what I've done over the past 12 years.
I could just
Councilmember McIntosh. it has really sharpened my perception of how the public views state, local, and federal governments and what ability or inability we have to affect some of the big problems that face our community. Communications are always difficult. Getting our point across on complex topics in sound bites and Facebook posts is not the best way to go, but it seems to be one of the best ways. And we have multiple avenues to communicate, but we still find ourselves struggling, being unable to get word out to people. So it has really impacted me from a standpoint of, especially when we were first into grips of this, and there was panic going on, of having people ask me to do something that I had to tell them I couldn't do because that's a federal or a state role.
If I could, John Larson, if I could build on this, I think what we found is that we have a lot of people staying at home now, and they have a lot of things on their mind. They're dealing with jobs, they're dealing with kids at home, they're dealing with issues of unemployment, what have you. And oftentimes what I found is I'm getting calls like Jeff is talking about, of things that really I can't solve. Issues dealing with the school system, for example, or systems dealing with mental health, or even getting appointments for COVID shots. And so, but they're calling me because I'm the most visible symbol of city government. And so what I have to do is try to act as a traffic cop and direct them to other resources. Sometimes it takes me a while to figure out exactly who to make that contact to. But I think, as far as a center point of the public trying to work their way through these things, they look to city officials to provide them answers. And at least my experience has been, fortunately, I've got an excellent Cal who is helping me get through some of this stuff, who works with city government. But it has been a challenge in the sense of, like Dee Dee was saying, every day I'm getting emails and phone messages at a level that I really hadn't experienced before.
You're the person in the face they know to go to for help. Sure.
We are the person, yeah.
This is Alan. I think my role has changed in several ways, but what I've tried to do is to strike a balance between providing health and safety for our citizens, at the same time minimizing the impact on our economy, and particularly our small businesses. It breaks my heart when I have calls from individuals saying, Mayor, I've rode this out for 4 months or 5 months, but I can't make it another month. Why can't we get back open, or why can't we do this? So during the deep throes when we had the shutdown, it was difficult decisions. But I do remember the morning I got a call from the head of Wake Forest Baptist Medical and the head of Novant saying, Mayor, if you don't take some very drastic actions, people are going to die. So it got my attention very quickly, but it still doesn't lessen your feelings about your small business community here in Winston-Salem.
This is Annette. I say that my role really hasn't changed in serving our community. It's just how I serve them and how I had to adapt to serve them. Getting lots of phone calls about more personal issues. They, as others have said, they didn't know where to go. And so trying to get them connected to the right resources has been more critical than before. I'm a native of Winston, and I grew up in East Winston in the ward that I serve. The problems that we've been facing have been long-term problems. And so we still are being creative in how we serve the residents who have the fewest resources. They didn't have the technology. They may have lost their sources of income, but they were already very near the bottom. So the role of bringing hope, encouragement, opportunity to get through the pandemic has been a challenge. So how we talk over the phone more, we no longer can do in-person meetings. So we had to figure out ways to continue to get community connected to the information they need. And that's still an ongoing problem that we just have to be a lot more creative in getting people connected to the technology. And particularly, I have a lot of elderly in our ward who aren't connected at all. They don't have smartphones. They don't have smart TVs. So it's really important to constantly let media know that they aren't going to respond. They're missing that information. We have to be creative in how we get to them by using more of the television advertising, not advertising, but the television medium, news, to get them informed. So that's what I feel.
This is Robert. I would just echo a few comments. First off, as Annette just said, I don't think my role has changed. I think my to-do list has changed dramatically. And to share Jeff McIntosh's comment, I think one of the frustrating things has been the to-do list have so many items on it that I have no influence over. Bottom line is, until we get a vaccine and everyone's vaccinated, we can't solve many problems. We can't put the folks back to work at the U.S. Air call center in town, things of that sort. So it's been very frustrating, and I think part of our job has been to keep people focused that we will get out of this. And I think that if there is good news, it's that we seem to be getting towards the end. We shall see, though. Thank you.
I'll speak as one of the newer council members. I think all of my colleagues who've been around have spoken, but I don't know that this has affected my role, but learning what my role is, the pandemic has made that more difficult. I remember when we were campaigning and COVID was just kind of the news over in Asia, council member Scippio told me, because we've known each other for a while, she said, this job does not come with a handbook. You know, you have to learn it on your own. And I couldn't learn it from others because we're not all in the same place at the same time. When you're in a new job, you literally absorb information from hearing what other people are saying around you. You learn by seeing how a seasoned expert deals with a situation, and you learn from that person, and then you apply it to your own situation. So I've missed out on that critical learning the culture and learning how other people do it, who know what they're doing because they've done it a lot. And then to reiterate with just different words that Mayor Pro Tem Adams said, everything is an emergency. No matter how good you are at triaging, when every patient that comes in needs to go immediately to the OR, it's very consuming. It consumes your time physically and mentally. And every issue that we deal with it's an emergency issue. People are losing the roofs over their heads. People are not able to get they can't go into their jobs and work. It's not a little bump in the road. It's a huge, huge sinkhole.
Any other thoughts?
Well, check. All right. So when I first started off in politics, I would say 11 or 12 years ago, I found high value in just sort of getting out, meeting with my friends and neighbors and talking over some of the issues they had. I would have these large town hall meetings, and then I later transitioned to more neighborhood style meetings. So I just like getting out, finding out what the issues are in person and helping to solve those problems. The pandemic has made that to be extremely difficult. I've had to rely on technology in order to serve my constituency, which is a little bit different than how I'm used to doing or how they're used to me doing. So it's been a process, but overall, I think we've been able to be somewhat successful during the pandemic because of it.
I would like to say that I'm in total agreement with everything that has been stated so far by every council member. And although I am new to city council, I am not new as an elected official. And as an elected official, I think that for me, it's very important for me to meet the residents or the constituents that I serve where they are, and realizing what their current needs are and being able to meet them and meet those needs at the present time. My role with the pandemic, I don't believe has really changed, because the issues that I wanted to address for my constituents and for the city really have not changed. If anything, they have been amplified and created new issues for us to address.
So several of you mentioned in the comments that you made how, while your role may not have changed, it sounds to me that the urgency of your role and the urgency of what you're hearing has been amplified. And I'm curious about how that has impacted your ability to connect. And again, several of you talked about, I think Councilmember Taylor in particular talked about wanting to get out and meet your constituents where they are. And that may look very different today. There isn't the opportunity to have them come before a council meeting. You have to meet them in different ways. But I'm sensing from what many of you said, they're still finding you, and you are finding them as well too. But how has the pandemic impacted how you work with your constituents and how you work with each other? Councilmember Mundy talked about not being able to learn from all of you on the job, so to speak, because you all haven't been able to physically be together. And so perhaps talk a little bit about how it's impacted your ability to connect and to interact with each other as well as with your constituents and even with city staff as well too. I know they miss connecting with you in the ways they used to before too.
Nothing beats a personal touch. But I think that what we have done is the very best that we could do during these trying times. And I think that what we have all shown is a resiliency to be flexible and to keep business moving forward. We have been able to use Zoom efficiently. Many of us have been able to have community meetings with our constituents using Zoom and other platforms. With our city council committee meetings, city council meetings, we have just had to be flexible and do things in the most creative way possible to keep our city moving forward. And I think we've been successful.
I agree. We've had a hard time following our governor's lessons and mandates, and also what we're putting in place for the city, getting out and getting to know people and being torn between that and staying at home and staying safe. So it was always on my mind that I needed to model good behavior if we were going to ask our citizens to do what was necessary not to spread the virus. That means I had to make a constant choice between modeling good behavior or taking steps in real life to be present.
Councilmember Scippio, I think you were trying to get in.
Yes, I was agreeing with Councilmember Burke. But my perspective is, number one, I want to say that I think our city staff has done a phenomenal job keeping all of our services going in spite of the limitations and the restrictions that COVID put upon us. And I think that we learned some new behaviors through that. The whole concept of how many people literally need to be in the office is something that needs to be really assessed, because so much has gone on and been done well with people working from home. One of the things that I'm sort of like Kevin Mundy, I do love fellowship. And even before COVID, I don't believe our council had enough interaction with each other. And so we didn't do really good team building before COVID. And I hope as we look through the next 4 years that we'll consider our relationships with each other that has a little more interaction. If it hadn't been, I was new, I was filling in, well, I got appointed to fill in a term. But one of the things that made my first 2 years really, really wonderful was coming to the office and spending time with the others who came to the office, and that was Jeff McIntosh and John Larson. It really was important for me to come to the office because I'm not the kind of person that can stay at home. I don't like staying at home. I like getting out. And so during COVID, I still came to the office as much as I could, as did Mr. Larson. So having someone here to talk to, bounce ideas off, is very, very stimulating and very productive. So I would hope that more council members would think about coming to the office as opposed to staying home as soon as everybody gets vaccinated and it's safe. And I do commend the staff again for the excellence that they have done in keeping the city operating at a superb level. I don't think anyone missed a beat in any of the services they provided or in their duties. It's just been really wonderful.
I don't know. This is John Larson. I don't know what the residue will be of all of this pandemic, Zoom meeting type working from home, and the separation that we've had as a result of that. I am anxious to get out of it. I don't like it. As a council, we moved upstairs to the third floor, and we hadn't really even settled in before we all had to go home. And so we've never really even had the opportunity to occupy our new space, the opportunity for dinners and stuff that we used to enjoy before council meetings, or various opportunities to convene with committees that were meeting. We just don't have those anymore. And the Zoom is an effective technical way to handle meetings, but it's not a very sociable way to handle meetings. And for the politics of what we have to accomplish, that personal contact, I think, is incredibly important. So I'm anxious to get out of this, and I'm sure we will. And I want to look forward to that day that we can do that. But for now, we're kind of stuck with, as Councilmember Burke said, we're doing, I think, an excellent job of technically meeting the needs of government. But I don't know that we're meeting, ultimately, this planning session will be an important aspect, I think, of trying to coalesce around some central ideas or vision of what we all hope to accomplish. And so we'll see how all this works out.
Let me just kind of tie in what John was saying. I certainly agree with that, as other comments as well. I really miss the direct interaction with the constituents and being able to sit around the table and solve a problem. Robert Clark and I were talking yesterday about if you can get a group around a table, you can generally find what the core problem really is, and most of the times find a solution to it. And trying to do that virtually or over the phone is much more difficult. And I certainly miss the interaction with my colleagues on the council. As John was saying, the informal dinner before the council meetings, I think, helped to build a lot of teamwork and fellowship, and really contributed to our working together. So hopefully we can get back to a regular schedule sometime very soon.
This is Robert. I'll just offer one quick comment. I agree with what's been said before. I think we all need to put on our to-do list, and I'm not trying to get in the weeds here, but we need to have some talk with the towns in person as soon as we can, and maybe more than one per ward, so we actually can meet with some folks and reconnect with our communities visually.
Councilmember McIntosh here. One of the big casualties of COVID to me was not having the city manager buy me lunch every 2 weeks.
I never knew that was an option.
The other thing is the dynamic that is missing, even though we all get together on a Zoom call and we can all hear each other and see each other's faces. The dynamic of what happens in the room, kind of what some other council members have said, is really important, and I really miss that. I miss going to the National League of Cities, where we get to spend time as a group, individually, one-on-one, just sort of clusters of people, but for an extended period of time. So you really can discuss things that are germane or not germane to city government. It just really helps, again, find out what's on people's minds. I really missed sort of the constituent things that we didn't do this year. National Night Out, I know to an awful lot of us, is a big deal, where we get to thank our constituents for pitching in and helping out. And also a program that Dr. Burke started called Project We Care, where we get to highlight and award and just recognize neighborhood groups that have done a great deal of work throughout the course of the year. So those are big losses to me. As far as how I personally interact, I was pretty comfortable doing business digitally on sort of day-to-day stuff, but the personal attention, the slap on the back, the handshake has really, I miss that an awful lot.
I do wonder if we're ever going to shake hands again. It's interesting to listen, and you all perhaps may have read this, or you'll hear more about it when we talk about the community focus groups. But people in some of those focus groups talked about the value of Zoom, that from a community engagement perspective, it has allowed more people to access, to be part of conversations that maybe they wouldn't have had or thought of the opportunity before because perhaps they were home. So there's certainly an upside. They also talked about the downside and the digital divide, and those people who don't have access to technology and therefore can't access those things. Or on the other side, people who, we heard a lot about Zoom fatigue, that they're now tired of the Zooms and are choosing not to engage. So it's a very tenuous relationship I think we have with technology right now because of the year that has been. So anything else on your own interactions with each other or your constituents or staff?
Again, this is Councilmember Adams. Staff has done a tremendous job, just like what's been said. Councilmember Larson said earlier, I don't think for people like me, I could not have done anything without my community assistant liaison, Zena Johnson. She is the spoke in the middle of the wheel for me. With all of the spoke, the wheel in the middle of the wheel, all the spokes to staff, community, colleagues, business, meetings, you name it, events. She has made it possible that there have been minimized, issues of being able to get done what we can get done. With staff, more meetings than normal, but it's okay. Again, miss the personal touch, but I also like to think that this is something new and that we'll get past it. I just want everybody to know that what we're feeling is no different than what everybody in the world is feeling. So, I just say we try to do the best we can with what we have to do. Look for opportunities at this time, as Councilmember McIntosh alluded to. Those community events and things that we've been doing for years or whatever, how do we ensure that they're better when we get ready to jump off again? We heard the National Black Theater Festival, which attracts over 65,000 people to our city every odd year. They had to struggle with the decision to do a virtual and an in-person and try to make it work. And they made the decision this week to cancel it until next year. Imagine how hard that was. But all I ask everybody to do is, these are tough times that we have to make the decision. As we say, we have to lead by example. I know how badly everybody wants to get back together and be in the office and be in the halls and everything, but we are not at a place that we can make that happen right now. It's coming, but I still believe that it's our responsibility to continue to lead by example for not just the public good, but the public safety.
Final question I have on the pandemic. Are there things that are on your radar today? Are there things that you hadn't necessarily been concerned about, but that are on your radar today that weren't there a year ago?
I would say that anything that's on my radar now was on there a year ago, 12 months ago. But particularly, I mean, we deal with so many different subject matters, issues, you know, policy things, that if people say, well, we got more people that's homeless, encampments, well, housing has been on our radar ever since I've been on the council with our, you know, housing study and everything else that we're doing. So I don't have anything on my radar now that wasn't on my radar a year ago. I look at our systems, our process systems of everything that we do. We create policies, procedures, partnerships and programs and all of these things. My thing now is COVID has tested whether our systems actually work. That's the thing that's gotten me kind of, you know, up and ears big and eyes big. How do we come out of this to ensure that whatever we create, craft, whatever, that it can be audited, it can be questioned, it can be viable and sustainable, and that we can prove it with data that the people can believe in.
I agree with Mayor Pro Tem that still got all those things on our agenda, but I think just a little bit of a different take on it. This time last year, I wasn't worrying as much about getting our small businesses reopened, particularly the restaurants that we have lost already and the ones that are still just hanging on by a thread. So that's a little bit on my radar more than it was a year or so ago.
Councilmember McIntosh, I want to echo what both Alan and Dee Dee said. Although Mayor Joines, I know that your focus has always been around small business. You've always understood the importance of having strong local small businesses. But like Dee Dee, I don't think there's anything new on my radar. It just seems like some things that are on my radar are just more heightened. You know, income inequality, poverty, obviously the housing, affordable housing issue. I share a concern with Dee Dee on that. What I think I learned through this is to make sure that we're not going to be able to predict the next black swan event. COVID is not going to, the next war is not going to look like the last war, but it's important for us to have systems that aren't fragile, systems that bend and don't break. We have an extremely good emergency preparedness staff. So I think we're good there, but I think we need to keep the focus on being able to be adaptive and to react as quickly as possible to new events.
Mm-hmm.
This is Annette. What's on my radar now that wasn't on my radar a year ago is the seriousness of the digital divide, that so many people are not able to participate in the new way of communication because of a lack of internet, a lack of resources to tap into smartphones, smart TVs, computers, etc. It's been there, but I don't think we knew it was as dramatic until we find that people are now shut in. So many children were not able to do school because they lack those resources. And sometimes I think we don't always think about those who don't have as much and how it impacts their lives. The other thing that is on my radar now is the need for all communities, including ours, to think about the kinds of industries that can endure and sustain dramatic impacts like COVID, there were so many industries that got created. I mean, whoever thought there would be a whole mask making industry? But that's for now. But how do we create jobs that are sustainable when we have these kinds of shutdowns? I think we have to think about cause and effect and how we can create a community that can live in spite of what these tremendous threats are. I know we aren't soothsayers, but I think we have to at least start thinking about how do we sustain our communities when we have these kinds of threats. We've never had this kind of threat before, but I suspect we're going to have this and other kinds coming in the future.
I recall, go ahead.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that I totally agree with everything that has been said, but I want to go back and really highlight what Mayor Pro Tem Adams said, because what was on my radar a year ago is exactly what is on my radar today. As I said, those issues have just been amplified. And I think that it is critically important that we evaluate the systems and the processes that we have in place now, whether or not they work. And we need to have some accountability measures tied to these processes and systems so that we are always using data to make decisions and that we are transparent with the data so that we can have buy-in from the community, from the people that we serve.
I think this is John Larson, over a year ago, there were several council members, and maybe even the mayor, who were forecasting a very bleak budget. And, you know, I tend to be optimistic about these things, and I didn't really appreciate, I think, fully the economic impact that this was going to have on the general economy of Winston-Salem, but on the city's budget specifically. And when we look at then the cuts that were necessary, we were facing, and the declining revenues that were coming in, and the issue that we were reevaluating all the property this time and what that might mean for the tax base in the future. You know, I think I probably paid more attention to the budget this year than maybe I have in the past, and trying to figure out how we were going to navigate through all of this. And we're blessed as of March 3rd or March 11th, I guess, when the president signed the Relief Act that we now enjoy. And I guess that's taken a lot of the pressure off of us, but it doesn't remove the long-term sustainability of the small businesses that are still suffering, and hopefully the recovery that we're going to have to undertake with the seriousness of continuing sort of the effort to make the city grow, not just recover, but continue to grow. So I think if I would pay anything more of the budget, this is for Robert Clark's benefit, that what we're looking at in financing, I think is going to be an incredibly important dialogue for the coming year or two.
Any other reflections?
Yeah, this is Councilman Clark. Just real quick, echo a few things. I think the mayor is right on. We got to do something to help the small businesses restart. Restaurants and bars come to mind because they literally were shut down by the governor, rightly so to a certain degree. But typically when we talk about economic development, we're talking about recruiting new folks here, which we should not lose sight of that. But we got to do something once the restrictions are lifted to see what needs to be done to get a lot of these small businesses back open. And it's certainly more than restaurants and bars. There are others out there that have really suffered. But there's a lot of jobs that that are in that industry that we need to help to come back. And it will be a difficult budget year, as it always is.
All right. Well, hopefully this was helpful to hear and to share some of your own experiences in this past year. And I heard some important takeaways for certainly the community, but also for each other as colleagues, how you hope to continue to interact when it's safe to do so. Now what we'd like to do is transition a bit before we'll take a break in a little bit. But before we do that, I'm going to invite staff to kind of reground us a little bit in the strategic plan and the process that's been used by the city to develop the current strategic plan. And I view this as an opportunity to really kind of help set the stage for what you'll hear in a little bit about the community input and some of the visioning that we'll do, as well as identifying the key initiatives that you all are interested in. So before we begin that, I'm going to turn it over to Scott Tesh to go through a bit of an overview of the strategic planning process to date.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, City Council. This is going to be a very quick few slides from a very high level to talk about process and the plan that we have and the language in it. Those first two bullet points there that you see, 6 strategic focus areas. I want to talk about how the plan is constructed now and what we may be looking for in our 2021 plan. We have the 6 focus areas and have had them for some time, and many of your priorities seem to fit very well into those focus areas. I think you'll hear and have heard, even over the last hour, a lot of terminology get used interchangeably. You'll hear priority, objective, strategy, initiative, and what you're going to hear out of the consultant and out of staff, particularly going in tomorrow, is you're going to hear the term initiative more often. And so when you hear initiative, I want you to think, as the mayor and many council members have said, that 10,000 foot level. We're going to use that term initiative to mean that 10,000 foot level. So underneath the focus areas, we're going to look at your initiatives or priorities. And so I want you to bear in mind when you hear that term initiative, it may not have been used in the prior plan, but that's what we're going to key in on as your high-level priorities going forward. And then underneath that, we'll have the action items. And the second bullet point there, talking about planning process and alignment, we'll get into in the next couple of slides, but I want to talk about, from a process perspective, where we've been over the last couple of months and where we will be in May and June. And so, Kelsey, if you'll advance to the next slide for me. The facilitator met with each one of you one-on-one, met with city staff at a department head meeting. And so we had really, in January, started this process with the facilitator. We have been really starting this process and thinking about it for months into the fall about how we would do these community meetings. And as you know, we held 4 focus groups, which Michelle is going to give you the input from. One specifically for local businesses and economy, one for local nonprofits, one for neighborhood leaders and residents, and one for what we called other institutional, but were larger employers in terms of the school systems, higher education, and our major hospitals. We also had that one publicly open meeting that anyone could come to. And again, Michelle will give you the feedback from those, but those were part of our input strategy, along with the resident survey that was kicked off in November and culminated in late January. And a presentation was given to the Community Development, Housing, and General Government Committee last week. We will have, again, some of that resident survey information coming back to you a little later today as part of the input process. So we had several methods of communication and input from residents and other sectors of our city and community over the last couple of months. Today and tomorrow will obviously be the opportunity for you to look at where we are and where we want to be, and talk about your priorities, your initiatives that you would like to see happening over the next 4-year horizon for the strategic plan. Kelsey, if you'll go to the next slide for me. After we get through this meeting, as City Manager Lee Garrity said, staff will be working on what we call those action items, those specific actions that we're going to link to your initiatives to make sure that we accomplish what you want to have happen. Individual conversations will take place with the council members and also with staff, and we will bring you back a draft of the strategic plan with those items in May as an information item for consideration, and then in June for projected adoption. So there will be multiple opportunities in a one-on-one setting and as a group to look at the initiatives that you put forward, as well as the action items that are going to underlie them over the next 4 years. And a note there that the strategic plan doesn't end when you adopt it. That there will be annual updates as part of budget processes and capital planning processes, that we will do formal updates on initiatives and action items going forward, and that we will link the appropriate performance measures to those. So very much today and tomorrow are going to be about setting those high-level priorities, but there will be another 6 or 8 weeks of ensuring that we have all of the nuts and bolts and the things that are more in the weeds, and that we've got the right direction that staff needs for work plans for not just the coming year, but what we're going to be looking at for the next 4 years. Kelsey, if you'll advance one slide. A note, this is your plan, as Mr. Garrity said, not ours. It does reach out not just to who's in City Hall, but it touches everything that we operate and all of the programs that we have. And if you'll advance that final slide for me on process, Kelsey, we want to talk about, each strategic plan action item that we put in this plan becomes a key work item. And we're going to start reporting more regularly on key work items to City Council. You currently see on each one of the information items and action items that you get in the agenda system, there's a box that tells you whether or not it is a strategic plan action item. And so we have been doing that, and we'll continue to note where things specifically linked to your strategic plan are being brought before you for consideration and action. And those last 2 bullet points there, again, the cycles annually in terms of reviewing resource allocation. If money becomes available as it has to the rescue plan, obviously opportunities there to look for alignment between the strategic plan and new resources that have become available. And so we want to think of, this is a 6 or 8 month process in terms of building this strategic plan, but there is an implementation and an inherent flexibility in that plan annually as we look at our resource allocation through the budget and capital planning processes. So just wanted to kind of, again, reiterate that today is not the end of this process by any stretch of the imagination, and we look forward to continued communication from City Council and staff in this process. If there are any questions about the process, I'd love to entertain those. Otherwise, just wanted to put that forward. Thank you.
Questions? Okay, we have on the agenda tomorrow, we'll start tomorrow afternoon with the review and update of the specific initiatives that are currently within the strategic plan. Staff will be providing that. So there'll be more opportunity tomorrow to talk specifically about some of the initiatives that are there and progress that's been made. But any questions about process before we break? Okay. So it is almost 2:10 on my computer clock, 2:08 to be precise. 15 minutes. Can we reconvene at about 2:25? on the dot on my clock. And so we will resume. Now we are going to move to start hearing some of the specific community input that was gathered to help inform this process. I imagine what many of you will hear are some very common themes across what many of you have already spoken about this afternoon, and what many community members are experiencing as well too. And so we have two main pieces of information to provide. The first is a summary of the results of the resident satisfaction survey, and I believe you all have received a copy of those results. And we will also be sharing a high-level overview of the feedback received from the community focus groups, which were held earlier this month. And so first, I'm going to turn it back over to Scott Tesh to provide the information about the resident survey.
Thank you again, Michelle. And as we mentioned, the Community Development, Housing, and General Government Committee got a presentation on the 2020 resident survey that ended here in late January last week. And that presentation was included in materials that went out. And the presentation that we have today is going to attempt to summarize that information at a little higher level and draw out specific highlights from areas in the benchmarks, as well as the importance and satisfaction ratings that are done in the survey. So Kelsey, if you'll advance to the next slide for me. The resident survey information, I think, is going to complement the focus group information very well. Our resident survey tends to focus on our current programs and services and perceptions of them, where the focus group information may talk about gaps in those specific services or new initiatives or ideas that are out in the community. Just overall, we talk about overall perception. So we ask questions in this 7-page, 165-ish question format about how do you feel about the city as a place to live or work or raise children. We ask general questions about how you feel about the availability of affordable housing. We ask overall communications questions, not specifically about our marketing and communications department, but we ask about how people want to be communicated with, how they are being communicated with by the city. We ask them how they feel about their ability to engage the city council as well as individual commissions. So we ask kind of those overall communications questions, and then ask several categories of questions related to public safety, transportation, community development, and as you see, the list goes on there. So the information that you're going to get is in these general areas, and we're going to jump into the summarized level of those. So if you'll advance to the next slide for me. Do you want to spend a second talking about survey administration? Again, it's done through a third-party contractor, ETC Institute. This is the third year that we have worked with them. We got, as the mayor pointed out, almost 1,300 responses to the survey this year, which was an amazing number, with more than 100 per ward. ETC has done a very good job making sure that the respondent demography matches that of the city very well. And again, we've done this for 3 years in a row now. 2011 was the last year before that we had done, so we're starting to see information at a trend level. We're going to specifically look at regional benchmarking. We're going to look at satisfaction and priority together, and I'll explain when we get to those slides. There's two different ways we'll look at it. And then we'll look at some program level data as well as some high service area level data. So let's jump right in. We'll go to the next slide. The first thing that we want to note is that overall residents are happy, or particularly as it relates to our regional benchmarks, with what we're providing. So, in this bar chart, you can see the city of Winston-Salem is in blue, the regional benchmark there in silver. And in many of these categories, we are at or above the average level of satisfaction with that service. And you see a few areas there where we're a little bit behind, 2% in recreation and parks. And I would tell you, that 2 and 3% level is even within the margin of error. So 2 or 3% is not a huge drop off. But as we get closer to the bottom there, we'll see community services, which we kind of defined as community development and neighborhood services, code enforcement, rehab, those types of services. We see a pretty significant discrepancy there. And just a little bit in transit, and then again about 5% in streets and sidewalks. So this is that overall service level area. And I want to encourage you, if you have questions or comments at any point, feel free cut me off and ask those. On the next slide, we're going to dig a little bit deeper into individual programs and services. And so, Kelsey, if you'll advance to that next slide. Yes.
I do have a question.
Yes, sir.
For instance, public transit services, was there a qualifying question asking the respondent if they used public transit services, or was it perceptions of the entire community?
Yes, sir, Councilmember Mundy. So what we've reported here is the overall perception of all of the respondents, but we do at the back of the survey ask two actually qualifying questions. We ask, have you used a transit service in the last year, and do you consider our transit service to be your primary mode of transportation? And so if you would like, be more than happy to take that question and cut it by those two qualifiers so that you can see the difference in response from those groups and how they rank that.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir. Kelsey, if you'll hit that next slide. So this slide, opportunities for improvement. These are where we ask specific questions under the service areas, and this is where we have a negative variance from the benchmark. I think your eyes will naturally draw to a few of these that are larger than others. And so I'll start by saying, if you look at the maintenance of city recreation centers being 17% below the regional average, and our youth programs and activities being 20% below the regional average, those are two areas where we have a very stark difference in terms of our regional benchmarks. I will note there are a few here in public safety in terms of the overall feeling of safety in the city, as well as the visibility of police and overall efforts to prevent crime. Those three show up specifically. There are a few here related to community services when we talk about enforcing exterior maintenance, so code enforcement and cleanup of trash on private property. We do see down there maintenance of city streets and sidewalks being 9% below the regional average. So the takeaway from this chart is these are the areas where, again, we have a pretty significant variance from the regional. I will tell you we have the U.S. average as well, and most of these mirror pretty well in terms of regional and U.S. average. There are a few places where they don't, but these are, again, those areas that you might want to keep in mind when you're thinking about priorities for residents in terms of our current services. Are there any questions specifically in this area before we move on? Councilmember Mundy?
Yeah, Scott, sorry. I might pepper you with questions on this because I'm used to looking at a lot of consumer research. This is interesting to see how we stack up against the region, but these are all areas that we've measured before. Is that correct?
When you say we've measured them before, do you mean in a prior survey?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. What I would be interested in seeing, and I don't know if you have it, but is our year over year, or how have we improved or digressed from the previous time these different areas were measured? Because that really, for me, would tell me whether we're doing a good job versus what we did 2 years ago, as opposed to competing with the region.
Yes, sir, Councilmember Mundy. I will tell you there are two slides in the presentation that was given to Community Development, Housing, and General Government Committee, and I'll kind of refer to those. We saw, in terms of our trends, we looked at this 2020 being the third iteration of the survey versus the initial one in 2018. So we had a 7% drop in overall perception as it relates to the visibility of police in neighborhoods. A little drop, 7% in terms of ease of contacting the person you need in terms of general communications. Again, overall efforts to prevent crime, -9%. So those are levels where we have seen a negative trend, but we have also seen a variance from the benchmark. I will note in this, though, when you look at the perception of police overall, that did not decrease, and we are actually at where we are with regional and national benchmarks. So it's not necessarily an overall perception that something's happening in police. It's more of a safety perception. In the livable neighborhoods area, we had some things related to recreation and parks that are down in the 10% range, which you see again reflected here in terms of programs and maintenance. And then we had some really, really significant variance for our in trend data for our sanitation services, but we're going to chalk that up to COVID this year, most likely. A lot of those services were suspended for a couple of months, and I think what you saw were people who were unhappy with the suspension of service for that time period, and we'll probably really need to see what the results look like from the following year to get a handle on those sanitation services.
Did you say specifically how we rank with youth programs and activities versus previous years? Because I could see that very much impacted by COVID as well. We just can't implement those programs. So did that cause us to trend down when it really wasn't anything that we could control?
That is not one of the negative trends that we saw. I could go back to the initial data set. Again, we're looking at 2018 versus 2020 here. I don't know off the top of my head. Those may have been ones that were already at a certain level and you wouldn't have seen that significant trend, but I will definitely go back and get that information for you.
Okay, thanks. I'll try not to bog you down anymore. Keep going. Thank you.
Questions are good.
Hey, Scott, can I ask a follow-up? I know this is about perception, the public's perception. Can we get some data down the road on what actual violent crime stats are?
Absolutely.
To compare the two. Perception versus reality. Thanks.
We do obviously report on violent crime. Police does that, and we have some information in the performance indicator report as well, but we'll make sure that we put those two together so that you can see them side by side. Any other questions generally on this slide? Otherwise, we'll move forward to the next slide, Kelsey.
This is Councilman Clark.
Yes,
real
sir.
quick. I was on mute. I did actually call on that question that Jeff just asked. The problem we have with crime data, there's not a consistent way to count it. There is a move across nationally to change to a consistent counting, but I would be very careful with any national data at this point. It truly is an apples and oranges comparison.
There are differences in terms of incident-based reporting and the other type of reporting, and we do have to
Yes,
be careful.
there are huge differences.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
And Scott, just not to believe this too much, but I'm more interested in what our internal trends are last year versus this year.
Absolutely, we can get that for you.
Thanks.
An overall note here in terms of customer service satisfaction, we are at or above the regional benchmark there with respect to customer service. So the city does have its customer service excellence initiative that was revamped in ways here as part of 2019 priorities and 2017 priorities in the current strategic plan. And so we do rate favorably when looking at customer service overall between us and our regional peers. Going on to the next slide. So I want to explain this one for a second. We call this the magic quadrant. And there is a series of questions on the resident survey where at a service level, and you see when I say a service level, maintenance of city streets, solid waste services, water, sewer services, police and fire, we ask the same question two ways. We say, one, what is your perception of that service? And so you see that on the x-axis or on the bottom scale represented from 2.5 to 4.5. The overall perception of satisfaction with that service. So the further it is to the left, essentially the less happy residents are with the service. On the vertical axis, we see it as a priority. The higher the priority is, the lower it is. And so we do this in those four quadrants and like to call out specifically things that fall into these quadrants. And when we look at the maintenance of city streets and sidewalks, that is one where we can recognize. And when we did this 2 years ago, it was also the only dot you would have seen down there in the lower left quadrant, where it is a relatively high priority for residents and is also one with which they are not terribly satisfied. If you looked at this graphic, year over year, at least for the 2 years, you will see that streets and sidewalks maintenance stays about the same in terms of priority level, but the perception of satisfaction with it actually goes down about 1/10 of a point. You would see a very drastic, again, change in solid waste there, probably because of COVID having gone down 2/10 of a point. A lot of the other services tended to stay in about the same area they were, but this graphic is a representation, again, of where you may want to focus in terms of both there being a negative perception or less satisfaction with the service, as well as a very high emphasis on priority at an overall level. Are there any questions about this one before we move on?
Scott, this is Annette Scippio.
Yes, ma'am.
So I'm looking at this quadrant. The ones that are in the far right bottom are high priority services that also got a very favorable rating.
Yes, ma'am. That would
Okay,
be
so
yes.
so fire services is a very high priority and it's got a very high rating. Fire
Yes,
service.
ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, but on the flip side, we get a public transportation is not a high priority, but it's also receiving a lower satisfaction rating.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
We will attempt to highlight this on another summary page, pull this information together with a couple of other things. And so the questions that you're asking, I hope that we're going to address a little bit of that coming here in a few slides as well, trying to think through what are the priorities compared to satisfaction. So. All righty. Kelsey, if you'll advance us to the next slide. So ETC provides us what they have as their important satisfaction analysis. What you saw on the previous page was at that departmental or service level. This is much lower when we ask specific questions underneath each one of those services. So if we saw streets and sidewalks, we asked 10 or 12 questions about how you feel about the maintenance and availability of streets and sidewalks and litter pickup. And so ETC takes the response to those questions and then asks below it, of these, which is the most important? And they have a formula to do essentially what I did on the previous slide, but do it at a much lower level here, getting into the weeds a little more. The takeaway here, what you saw on the previous page is the same here. Maintenance of streets throughout the city is a high priority and something that has a low level of satisfaction. Moving down the list, everything in red is what ETC qualifies as a very high priority. The ones you'll see in yellow on this slide and the next one are what they call those high priority levels. So in that very high priority city streets, you see a couple of community services issues related to code enforcement and vacant structure demolition. We saw affordability of water and sewer and stormwater bills pop up here for the first time. And again, that may be related to COVID and people looking at their budgets more tightly. I will say that we did look at the actual breakdown of residential monthly bills for the average customer across the 5 largest cities in North Carolina, and including High Point, and Winston-Salem ranks as the second lowest amongst that group of 6 at just a few dollars a month above Greensboro, and then escalating up into Durham, Raleigh, Charlotte, and High Point at the highest. So again, that's a perception of affordability of water and sewer, but the actual data bears out that we're a little lower on comparison to our peers. Again, I would caution you looking at brush pickup services that may be related to COVID. Leaf collection services on here, and we'll start to see again some of these public safety related ones in terms of crime prevention and visibility of police in neighborhoods. The overall satisfaction of fixed route bus service, we changed the methodology in the survey this year related to public transit. And so this became a higher priority, but it may be as a result of the method we used. There aren't as many sub-questions about transit, so I would just want to see where this one ranks out again next year. If we'll advance to the next slide, we'll see a few more of these, and then if we have questions, again, one issue here related to stormwater, sidewalk, and as it cascades down, I won't go through all of those, but some more things related to our livable neighborhoods and quality transportation areas as well. Any general questions about where this information comes from or how it's fallen out here?
It's Kevin again.
Yes, sir.
Back to the kind of methodology and how you ask the questions, and you may have provided this. I've not had a chance to dig deep enough to see it, but was this qualified over the last 12 months, or was it your perception in general over the last 5 months? I'm sorry, over the last 12 months or over the last 2 years? What was the time frame that was given?
So for all of these questions, it would have been in the last 12 months.
So, just pointing out the obvious, their level of satisfaction with bulky item pickup when we didn't have bulky item pickup.
Right.
So just saying, as I always do with research, take everything with a grain of salt. people could remember us running television ads in months that we knew we had not run any ads. So
that is specifically one carve out that I would say you will probably see a drastic change in the data. As we mentioned when you asked about the trends, some very negative trends in sanitation services this year that we will probably see bounce back in future years. All right, we'll move on to the next slide again, trying to highlight what's come from this. So this table has 3 columns. And so the first column is there that says lowest 4 satisfaction ratings. At an overall level, those were the 4 lowest rated services that you saw in that magic quadrant. Streets and sidewalks, public transit, stormwater, and then community services. Just overall lowest satisfaction. Moving into that next category, when we looked at the important satisfaction ratings, you'll see it says the highest 4, and there are only 3 check marks. That's because 2 of the highest 4 were in community development. And so those are specific services related to code enforcement. Again, in streets and sidewalks, you saw the overall maintenance of city streets. Water and sewer, we had there, again, we were talking about that water and sewer affordability issue. That final column is based on the benchmarking that we saw at the beginning, where our highest variances were. So again, we saw very high variances in some of the questions related to community services, specifically in recreation as it related to maintenance and youth programming, and in police as it related to overall crime prevention efforts, as well as police visibility. We try to pull this together in a table and say, where in multiple areas are we seeing from the survey responses that might indicate where you might want to focus some of your time or efforts. And again, what draws out there are the places where there are more than 1 checkbox. So again, community services related to code enforcement, nuisance structure abatement, and enforcement of our local housing ordinances, as well as rehab programs were in that, and then streets and sidewalks in terms of street maintenance. So just an idea here that across benchmarking and satisfaction and that merged important and satisfaction, there are at least 2 areas where residents are saying in multiple ways these are areas to look at. Any questions with how this is put together?
Scott, this is Annette Scippio again.
Yes, ma'am.
What are residents responding to when they talk about storm water? Is that puddling on the streets during a storm? Is it flooding in yards during heavy rains? Do we have a sense of what they're reacting to? And in those reactions, do we have a sense if it's localized to any 1 or 2 areas?
So let me take that in a couple of parts. We ask about stormwater overall, and so what you see in this table was just the overall perception of stormwater management throughout the city. We do ask specific questions about catch basin cleanliness in neighborhoods, and so we can dive into those. And the last part of your question, forgive me, what was the last part of your question, Councilmember Scippio?
If it was localized in areas,
So we can go back, we have location data to the census block level, and we can see if there were different perceptions either amongst the wards or individual census blocks. We can bring that information back to you and let you know where it looks like that.
Sometimes when it's raining really hard, there's a lot of puddling on the roads. And I wonder if that's part of what they're reacting to. So like low levels, there's lots of puddling. Sometimes it's occurring on like Salem Parkway and under some bridges. It's just, I just wondered if that's what residents are referring to, or if it's puddling on their streets. And I know some people are having problems with flooding because they may be near a floodplain. So the walking trails flood and it leaves mud on them. And I'm just trying to understand what they might be referring to. And I don't know if we asked the question to be able to get more specific about that.
We don't, in the current iteration of the survey, ask the difference between generalized flooding, road puddling, and what we may see in terms of stormwater management along our greenways and walkways. Good feedback, and we may have the ability to structure the questions in future years to get at that a little more directly. But it may be that this is an opportunity at a higher level to say that we need to look at stormwater overall and identify those areas that residents are least satisfied with.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Scott, I was going to ask this question later, but it's kind of similar. Do we have all of this data at the ward level, or at least at the zip code level? Because obviously we want to concentrate on everything that's a serious concern for the city as a whole. But when I'm talking to constituents in the ward, I'd kind of like to know how each of these is perceived specifically within the Southwest.
Yes, sir, Councilmember Mundy. We do have it by ward, and we can actually get it a little bit smaller than ward. What I will tell you is the further you drill down, you artificially lower the sample size and the significance of the tool itself. So it's not, when you see a variance ward to ward, the margin of error is larger because of what you've done to the sample size compared to the overall population of a ward.
Absolutely.
So we can get you that information. We'd be more than happy to do it, and actually have intended to provide that information along with some of the non-random responses where there's significant variance either between wards or between the random and non-random samples of the survey.
Thank you very much.
Yes, sir. Any other questions on this one before we move on to the next slide? Kelsey, if you'll advance that along for me. And so what we've done here is simply tried to align those instead of by the department or service level, align them by focus area. The items that you see in bold are the ones that were on that previous table. So it would have been the highest priorities in those three respective areas. So in safe and secure community, police visibility was the highest of those priorities, but we saw crime prevention and overall safety. Several things in livable neighborhoods related to both community development and recreation were high priorities. Streets and sidewalks, again, as well as public transit and quality transportation. We had some variances in website and social media in terms of our benchmarking, but those were not the highest variances or highest priorities. And then in healthy environment, both stormwater and water and sewer affordability. And we talked about those solid waste collection services maybe being an anomaly because of COVID this year. So just trying to, at a focus area level, align what was in the resident survey priorities. Any questions here? If not, that is the last slide I have on resident survey in terms of canned information. If there's any other information that you'd like to have, we have the full data set and are more than happy to review that in other formats or look for other areas or trends if you'd like us to. Otherwise, I will turn it back over to Michelle and allow her to do the complement to this with the focus group input.
Any other resident survey questions? Okay, so I'm going to just give you a high-level summary of the focus groups that our team conducted in early March. And I will say at the outset, it's a very different process than the statistically significant process that ETC goes through in the resident survey. So this was not scientific in that way. It was conversational. It was, however, anonymous. We did not take attendance at any of the focus groups. All of the participants were told that their information would be aggregated by focus group and it would not be attributed to any of them as individuals. And so over the course of 5 separate focus group sessions, we had about 100 participants. A couple weren't able to attend, but emailed us information after the fact. So right at about 100 individuals from the community participated. And in each of the focus groups, we asked the same questions. Some had a little bit of a different theme to them based on the specific participants in the focus group. So I think as has been mentioned, the focus groups we had one that was specifically targeted toward the local business sector. We had one that was specifically targeted to the nonprofit sector. We had another one that was targeted toward local institutions, and then another one that was neighborhood and community leaders. And then finally, we had an open to any interested resident or community member. We didn't check residency, but any interested stakeholder was able to participate. And so I would like to just give you a quick highlight of those, and Kelsey will be going through the slides. In each of the focus groups, we really focused on kind of two primary themes of the questions. One, somewhat similar to the conversation that you all had earlier this afternoon about the pandemic. We asked participants to talk a little bit about their current perceptions of the community or of the particular sector that they were representing. And so they talked about sort of the current state of the community or of their sector. And then we also then asked them to talk about future opportunities that they saw to help address some of the issues or the challenges that they had raised that were existing today in the community. And we specifically asked them what they felt the city could do to help address or support some of the issues or concerns that they had raised. And so in the first focus group that we held, it was members of the local businesses and the local economy, representing the local economy. Not surprisingly, obviously, the financial impacts on the local economy were top of mind for these participants. And what you see on the screen, and you probably saw in the report if you've had a chance to take a look at it, are some of the key themes and also the visual capture of the conversations that we had. So a few important things that came out of that conversation. Equitable access to resources was a key consideration that members of the local business community talked about. They also talked specifically about reinvestment in older buildings, continuing reinvestment in the downtown as being a current need or issue that they had identified. And then the need for increased patrons or visitor traffic. People in the restaurant industry as well as in the arts sector talked about the need for just foot traffic in each of their businesses or throughout downtown or other small businesses throughout the community. Then in terms of what the city can do to help address some of these concerns, many people talked about needing assistance and really, once it is safe to do so, having the city participate in some kind of campaign to reopen the city, if you will, to bring visitors back in a safe way. There was a lot of conversation about the divide within the community and specifically about Highway 52 and the differences that Highway 52 on either side create in the community, and wanting to make sure that marginalized communities are not left behind and that the economic disparities that have become exacerbated in the pandemic are addressed. And similar to, I think, some comments that a few of you made earlier this afternoon, there was a lot of conversation, obviously, about jobs and the need to create jobs and to address the needs of a new workforce in a post-pandemic workforce. I think it was Councilmember Scippio who talked about new industries like mask making. Who knew that would become a new industry? Well, there's certainly new skill sets that are required today. There are new ways that people are working, and being proactive about identifying what those new ways of working are going to be, and make sure that the workforce is prepared with the right skill sets to address a new economy, if you will, and a new workforce. So those were some of the key themes that came out of the local business economy focus group. Next slide, Kelsey. Next, we spoke with members of the local nonprofit community. And again, similar approach in the focus group. Many of the participants in this particular focus group knew each other, knew of each other's organization that they represented, and many of them had worked together before in a variety of ways. But when they talked about the current challenges, particularly in the pandemic environment, they talked about how size matters when it comes to the nonprofit community. And many of the people that participated in the focus group represented smaller nonprofit organizations, and they talked about the frustration and the challenges in securing government assistance, particularly the PPP program, not being able to navigate that very well, and really needing a network to help link those organizations together to help provide resources really to each other as they were navigating the pandemic. And then in turn, being able to provide their services to those in the community who needed their services. There was talk in this group. There were also members of the different arts venues who talked about the negative impact that obviously the pandemic has had on arts venues and entertainment venues, and how that has impacted the community. And then on a personal note, a number of them talked about their own constituents, the people that they serve through their organizations, particularly those in need, feeling very isolated, and that in the community they were seeing more and more isolation among the folks that they have interacted with. So then the conversation shifted a bit and talked about city support and what the city may be able to do, or what they would hope the city would be able to do to help address some of these concerns. Here they talked about wanting the city to serve as a connector to help these, particularly the smaller nonprofits, navigate kind of the ups and downs of trying to secure their own funding and support, and that the city could play a role in helping to be that connector, and also to connect these different organizations to each other. That's kind of where the idea of the city-sponsored nonprofit center came from. Many of them talked about that. And then this was the area initially that affordable housing really came up very strongly, and not just affordable housing as has been sort of the historic definition, but diverse housing options for community. Many of the participants talked about the differing needs that their constituents or their stakeholders had when it came to housing, and that there was not a one-size-fits-all approach to addressing the various housing needs within the Winston-Salem community. And then any questions about that? I'll pause for just a moment in case there are any questions.
Michelle, in the nonprofit, you don't seem to differentiate between the arts and cultural institutions and the social services groups. Are we seeing any differences there? I mean, particularly when you propose suggestions being proposed for a center of some sort, a clearinghouse for these organizations, you know, they're quite different, as we've seen in our grant applications that have come in. You know, we're dealing with two different sort of constituencies here.
Mm-hmm. The participants that were there were a mix, so they did not differentiate that. I think they were talking about their needs overall. So I think the voices that we heard were reflective of both the social services needs as well as the other arts and entertainment, cultural amenities as well too. So I think to your point, absolutely very different needs, but still the overall theme of creating support and connection among their own kind of more localized groups.
Okay.
But in terms of the participants, we didn't divide them up in any way based on what type of nonprofit they represented. Next, Kelsey. So the next focus group was local institutions, and this included representatives from the education industry as well as the healthcare industry. And when it came to discussion of the current state and the current challenges, I think you can imagine what the healthcare folks had to say, and certainly what the education folks had to say. However, a few interesting themes, I would say, that emerged from the conversation. In terms of those that represented higher education talked about some of the stability that they were regaining, and much like many of you talked about earlier, the city organization pivoting very quickly to an all virtual environment. Obviously, that's what folks in education needed to do very quickly. They talked about having the resources and the ability to do that. But then on the human side, they talked about the impact that it has had. Again, I'm talking higher education here, on students, that the personal situations that many students in higher education were facing, such as spouses losing jobs or loss of childcare, forced a number of higher education students to withdraw. And that was causing issues within the universities or within the institutions, as they were having to support students in a new and different way than they had before. Same is obviously true when it came to the healthcare profession as well too, and needing to support their employees as well as their patients too. This topic, or this particular focus group, there was a lot of discussion about transportation and access. There was also a lot of discussion about recruitment and retention of top talent, particularly when it came to skilled nurses. Several of the participants who were with healthcare industry talked about the difficulty they had, pre-pandemic in getting qualified skilled nurses. It became even more difficult once the pandemic hit. And then a real robust conversation about digital equity and the digital divide, that access to technology, access to the internet isn't just for Googling anymore. It's how you are educated, how students receive their education, again, at all levels, higher education as well as elementary up through higher education. It's also how many people access healthcare as well too. And therefore, the need to address the digital divide within the community became even more exacerbated, these folks talked about. And then transportation, again, both from an education standpoint in terms of access to education, and then access to jobs and healthcare too, really needing more transportation options for the community. In terms of other needs or support that the city can provide, again, a lot of conversation in this group about diverse housing choices for students as well as for other professionals throughout the community. Next.
Michelle, this is Annette Scippio. Can I ask you a question about the walkable Winston, that whole concept that came out with the institutions? Were they saying that we have sidewalks in much of our city, but not necessarily in the far out parts of outside of downtown and the older neighborhoods? There may not be sidewalks, but did you have a sense of were they talking about the lack of sidewalks, or because Winston-Salem is very hilly, it's hard to walk in? Our topography is unique here. But what were they talking about in terms of walkable Winston?
It really was how to improve the walkability of the city. I don't recall specific conversation about topography. I think it was really more creating safer routes to things like grocery stores, as well as to medical facilities, again, from your transportation nodes to those institutions, so that people are able to access them in a safer, more convenient way.
Thank you.
The next focus group was with neighborhood and community leaders. In terms of the current state, this is where I mentioned this earlier. People talked about resident engagement or community engagement and the value of Zoom, that more people have been able to engage, but that there are some downsides to that. Again, the digital divide came up here. Need for additional access to essential resources. Food deserts, access to healthy food was a big topic of conversation in this focus group, particularly as access to some of the services, some of the social services had been limited during the pandemic. Making more connections among neighborhoods, I think, was also something that was talked about, and improving infrastructure maintenance was a topic that this group discussed. In terms of areas of support that the city could provide, again, affordable housing choices or diverse housing choices came up really a number of times. And communication, engagement, again, I mentioned before, more resident engagement, more community engagement. Too much is never enough. People said there's still a need for more transparency, more access, and sometimes because there is so much information, helping the community cut through all of that information so they know how to access services easier and know how to access information from the city easier was something that this group talked about. Diverse community engagement, making sure that, again, kind of related to the digital divide, not everybody has access to a computer or to a phone or to Zoom, and they can't all engage in that way. And so we cannot leave people who don't have that type of technology behind, that their voices matter and they need to be part of the conversation. We need to hear from them and hear what their needs are as well too. Somebody said, even renters' voices need to be heard, and all parts of the city. You see a comment on the slide there, East Winston is hurting, recognizing that there is disparity within the community and how people have weathered the pandemic throughout the community. And this was the area where there was some discussion about community policing and additional visibility. I think it really tied with some of the things that were mentioned within the resident survey as well too. And then questions about that one? And then finally, the last focus group that we did was open to any interested community member. And in terms of the current challenges, this one really, I think, reflected a lot of what we heard in some of the other focus groups. Real conversation about inequities throughout the community, specifically as it relates to education. The pandemic really highlighted those who don't have the same access to education as others at all levels, not just higher education, but K through 12 education as well too. Inequities in housing options and housing choices, access to healthy food and to transportation as well too. A focus on the need for the financial recovery related to the pandemic, specifically in terms of jobs, access to jobs, and bringing businesses back, small businesses, as has been mentioned a few times. The need for infrastructure maintenance. I frankly was a little bit surprised to hear this in open community meetings. We don't often hear people talk about infrastructure maintenance as a high priority, particularly in a pandemic. But that was something that a number of the members of the participants in the community focus group talked about. And then similar to the last one, communication, wanting to have even more communication from the city, particularly during the pandemic and people being home more too. In terms of the support that the community participants talked about, needing to address, again, the financial impact of the pandemic, specifically about bringing more businesses and related jobs back to Winston-Salem, improving economic mobility of residents, ensuring that there are job choices at different types of job availability within the city to help keep residents here employed and prosperous. Affordable housing, again, came up, and more robust community engagement, ensuring that all voices are part of the conversation about moving the community forward. So those were, I think that's the last slide, Kelsey. And so those were kind of the key themes that came out of the focus groups. And just a few comments I'll make just across the focus groups. I think you probably heard me, I sounded like a broken record on a couple of the topics, but some of the key themes that really transcended the different groups were housing choice, different, diverse, affordable housing choices, economic recovery in terms of jobs, businesses, bringing tourists back, bringing employers back to the community, addressing the inequities in access to services such as transportation, healthcare, food, education, community engagement, diverse and robust community engagement, and then infrastructure investment. Those, as I reflected back and reread the notes and reread my notes from those focus groups, those were really some of the key themes across all of those focus groups that we heard. Again, I just caveat by saying these were smaller groups. It was about 100 participants in total, not scientific, but at least a snapshot of what was on people's minds at the time that we had an opportunity to speak with them earlier in March. So I will pause there and certainly open it up to any questions that anyone may have.
Michelle, on this very last slide, bottom right corner, I just want to make sure that's racial inequity ampersand reparations, not the word of, OF. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Racial inequity and reparations.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Michelle, this is Annette Scippio again. I was focusing on a couple of things, the racial inequities as well as poverty reduction. Can you give me a sense of, I think to get 100 people is phenomenal for focus groups. I know they can be very insightful and quite valuable, but could you give us a sense of the composition of those groups regarding race?
I cannot give you a specific answer, ma'am. I would say, and I will say without any specificity that of the focus groups, the most diverse in terms of race would have been the open community focus group, this one that you're seeing here. But we didn't like I said, we didn't take attendance and we didn't note who participated or specifically track what their gender or race was for any of these.
Were these Zoom meetings?
Yes, ma'am. They were.
Were any of them recorded?
No, they were not.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Would that be an option going forward when we do these, or do we feel like recording would inhibit frank discussion?
I think it is, in my personal experience, I think you will have some people who it will certainly inhibit. In other cases, it will embolden some people probably to speak up if they think it's recorded. So I think it is mixed. We typically, as a facilitator, when I've done focus groups, we have traditionally had them be anonymous, but we do take notes and we tell people we take notes. That being said, I've been in focus groups for other strategic planning processes that have been open public meetings, and therefore there have been members of staff or elected officials present. But I will say that most people, some people will say, write down my name because I want them to know that I said this. Others may say they are more comfortable knowing that their comments are anonymous. Particularly, I think open community meetings are different when it's specific stakeholders that may interact with the city on a regular basis. I think there tends to be a little more hesitancy, just human nature, I think.
Okay.
Any other questions about these? Any reflections? Anything that you all heard from both the community survey, the resident input, as well as the focus group input?
Michelle, this is Councilman Clark. I can't scroll on here. Were there 5 of these group meetings or 4?
5.
5. So you average 20 people per meeting.
Yes.
Okay.
Some were smaller. The open community focus group was just to give you a sense, was about 45 people, I believe. So that was a much larger group. This last one that you just saw, when it came to I think the smallest group was the higher education and healthcare group, and that was maybe 8, I believe, 8 or 10, something like that.
Okay, thank you.
Michelle?
And we have the actual numbers too.
That's fine.
Michelle, Jeff McIntosh here.
See a lot of, go ahead. Jeff, go ahead.
So was there, I heard a lot of themes across all 5 groups. Was there any thought about doing a word cloud to show sort of the things that occurred most often amongst groups? I know you sort of summarized it, but it might be interesting to see.
Sure. Yeah, we can certainly do that.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Mundy, I think you had a comment.
I saw just a few instances, and this has come up before. People want us to address issues and items that aren't really in our bailiwick. Even if we wanted to, we couldn't. And I wonder, somewhere along the way, if we should not mount an educational program or a PR program that addresses some of these items that people want the city to take care of, and we just can't, like abandoned railroad tracks. That's not in our bailiwick, but I've heard it come up oftentimes in my ward. People don't know that. So it's not passing the buck necessarily. It's just educating people on what we can and can't do.
Michelle, this is Alan. I think a couple of things struck me, and was the fact that diverse affordable housing was mentioned in 4 out of the 5 groups, if I kept my notes correct. The other thing, I guess, from that jumped out at me, of course, is the level of satisfaction with city services. Particularly 75% of the respondents in the survey said they were satisfied with our police service, and those who wanted most emphasis, one of those was visibility of police in neighborhoods. So certainly I think it validates the work that we've been doing to support our police department, and Chief Thompson and the work that she's doing. We hear sometimes contrary feelings, but I think this validates what we've been doing.
This is John Larson. Could I ask a question of Scott? It's interesting to compare these 2 surveys. Scott, was the resident survey done pre-pandemic?
Councilmember Larson, no, sir. The resident survey was started after the election in mid-November and was completed in January here. So it was, heart of the pandemic, really. These 2 took place, the focus groups, just a 8-week period after the conclusion of the resident survey. Again, they do tend to ask the same types of questions, but in a different way. So they are different types of feedback.
Right. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Michelle, Councilman Clark, one more time, briefly. I'm the longest serving council member, so I've been around for 20 years and I've seen these surveys for the last 20 years. Without exception, road and sidewalk maintenance is always in that bottom left box. Every survey confirms the citizens are dissatisfied with what we do there. And I hope someday we will actually take the survey seriously and work on that. Everyone thinks it's very important and everybody thinks we do a sorry job. Thank you.
This is Annette. Councilman Clark, I think you're absolutely right. And I think because the one thing that residents do, almost everybody in this city does, is drive on our streets and highways and our roadways. And it doesn't take rocket science. If you drive around town, our roads are in bad shape. I'm amazed that it scored as high as it did. But I look across this survey and I think that, and the resident survey, as well as the focus groups, and I agree, it looks like we've done a good job on many things. And when you're a good family, you don't get complacent and think there's nothing else to do. There's always more that could be done to make our city better. And I think the focus groups and the survey both are asking for us to be very insightful about the direction of the city. And although some things didn't come up as a high priority, and it might be just because of what's going on in the nation right now, but things like racial equity, poverty, social justice issues are so part of the fabric of this nation that we oftentimes just accept that they're there, as opposed to us saying they are there, but what are we going to do to fix them? And I think a lot of these suggestions and support that people are saying is very good for us to hear and think about. One of the things we know, we have a high illiteracy problem in some neighborhoods. It's not discussed here. No one came up with that, but who wants to say we got high dropout rate? We have some real issues, though education may not be the area that the city focuses on because we claim it's the county's duty, but we can help reinforce the education experience through some of the services that we provide. And so I think this is really good to see and hear. This is my first time coming in at the beginning of this strategic plan. And I think it has a lot of food for thought for us.
I believe that, the surveys and Scott and staff, I want to thank you all for that, and Mr. Garrity. But there was a time 12 years ago that we did surveys, as they've stated, but I felt like the statistical sampling was very lacking for a city our size. And I suggested to staff and the council that we have to take the survey seriously, because how are we going to know what our citizens and customers that use our services, whether it's developers, anybody else, think about us? And the reason why we can tout that the number is up is because we put in more effort this time as to how we wanted this survey and these focus groups to be done. I feel like the one thing that's reoccurring, and I applaud the citizens that brought it again back to the front, we've got to figure out now, how do we make government more easily understandable instead of government speak, and transparent when it comes to the budget whether it comes to the spending and how we do our jobs. You know, I know we say, well, we got a website, they can go click, but as we've said over and over, everybody's not comfortable with that. The people that said they are, then they are. But there's a large majority that's not. And I think that it is incumbent upon us to come up with creative ways as to how we communicate and get our citizens a better sampling in numbers to buy or learn how we do this budget process. Because I've said before, with COVID, the rescue package, the budget, the CARES, we are now being held at a level of financial responsibility like we've never seen. And I think that's going to be my thing when you hear about, you see on these focus groups, that you see accountability, transparency, how are you spending the money? You need to ask us more. I think that's been very clear for me.
Any other thoughts or reflections on themes from what you heard from the survey or the focus groups?
One item that sort of permeates throughout this discussion is the travel and tourism industry, and this may fall under economics of small businesses, but clearly it's a subject that shows up in different categories of concern, and sort of tied into that, of course, is the arts industry, particular things like Black Theater Festival Group, Old Salem, whatever tourist attractions that we've had in the city that are now in peril, as it were, which is, I think, something we need to keep in mind. Infrastructure and maintenance is certainly one theme that continues to go. That's streets and sidewalks, but a lot of discussion about our parks and their condition. And I don't know what category that falls under broadly, but that seems to have some traction across the boards. There is one item that concerns me that I don't see in here at all, and I'm kind of surprised that it hadn't surfaced, but in a way I'm not surprised considering the economic peril and everything that we're dealing with right now, and that's our environmental issues. And I see nothing of a concern as far as trying to meet any kind of standards for improving our environment, water, air quality, carbon footprint, subjects like that. And I think as a municipality, we pledged ourselves to help address that issue, but I don't see it yet in our work plan. So those are some comments.
Focus groups are obviously anecdotal. And so we heard lots of stories that people shared with us during these focus groups. And on the issue of infrastructure, I thought it was particularly interesting that people talked, Councilmember Larson, to your point about parks, and Councilmember Scippio, you talked about streets and transportation. People said, we've been walking our neighborhood. We've got nothing, we can't go anywhere. And so we've been spending more time walking our neighborhood, and we've been paying more attention to sidewalks and curb and gutter and the condition of the park in our neighborhood. And that's where we go to recreate now. And so it is higher on their list of things that they're aware of, because they're spending their time very differently through the pandemic. So just interesting ways that people talked about how their interests and what they view as a priority has shifted as a result of the pandemic. Certainly that doesn't mitigate the need for jobs and economic recovery, but again, on a personal note, people talked about things that they see differently in the community, and also missing those big events, missing being with their neighbors and being proud of the community and wanting to be out with other members of the community, missing the ability to do that. All right, well, I'll ask you to keep these thoughts in your mind, and maybe on paper, if you have it in front of you, as we talk tomorrow about specific initiatives that you're interested in discussing to be added to the strategic plan. But as we get ready to close out today's conversation, I want to pose two questions to each of you, and I'll give you a moment to think about them. But first, given all that you've heard from the community, both through the survey as well as through the focus groups, and your own experience, particularly in this last year, what is true in your mind today? What is true about the Winston-Salem community that you hope will still be true 10 years ago? What is precious about this community that I know each of you love that you don't want to lose? And then I'll ask you, what is not true today about this community that you hope will be true 10 years from now? So this is thinking 10 years from now, when we are hopefully truly in a post-pandemic world. What is precious today that you don't want to lose? And what is missing today that you hope will be true in 10 years? I'll give you just a moment to think about that, and then I will ask you to go around and share your thoughts for each of those questions.
I'll go first because I did my homework. I got it here.
I forgot my gold stars, Councilmember Clark, but I'll give you a virtual one.
I need all I can get. First one I wrote down, what do I think is true now that I hope is still true 10 years from now? And that is, I truly believe we are a great place to live, work, play, and raise a family. And that kind of sums up everything we do, from jobs to parks and everything else. But that's my think it's true, and I hope we continue to be true. What I'd like for us to be 10 years from now that we're not right now is a top preferred city in the country. Mr. Larson referred to the survey that just recently came out, and we were in the group of, and I think it was described as cities that aren't in the top 30 but are up and coming. I think it was actually titled Up and Coming. I would like, and you see all sorts of surveys, and when I say top preferred city, I'm not going to define any more than that, but you see surveys from where's the top places to get good housing at an affordable price, or top places to retire, or top places for whatever it may be. So I just hope that, and I think we're heading that way, but we just got to keep going so that we make the surveys that you read in the magazines and online and things like that. Thank you.
I'll jump in there. I did my homework as well, Councilman Clark.
Good.
What is true today is that Winston-Salem is one of the best places in the country to start and grow a business. In fact, we were tied for #1 in the country with Austin, Texas for the percentage growth in new business startups. So I hope we're continuing to create new small businesses 10 years from now. What is not true today, and I hope is true 10 years from now, is that right now we don't have enough affordable housing. And so I hope 10 years from now we have addressed the housing needs that we identified last year or 2 years ago in the housing needs study that we had done, which is about 14,000 units.
But if I could add my bit to that, and it's sort of redundant, but I think the city has shown in the last 10 years anyway, a great deal of flexibility and adaptability, in that we show a lot of creativity in how we conduct ourselves. We've come out of an industrial era, and we've gone into a whole new level of technologies, and we've been able to make a change in our whole economy based on that flexibility and creativity. And I think hopefully we will keep that edge as we go forward into the next decade or so. The one thing that concerns me, I guess, looking at the current landscape, and hopefully we can correct it, is we have a great deal of poverty and unemployment issues in this city. And so looking for economic equity across the board, I think, is an issue, and it filters out into employment, housing, a variety of accessibility to services, which we need to address ultimately to pull this city back together. Thank you.
I'll jump in. What's true now, and I hope will still be true in 10 years, is that Winston-Salem is an authentic, funky, genuine place, which I think is the key to small business attraction, small business startup, people choosing where they want to be versus having to live someplace. And I hope that remains true. Kind of like Austin's motto is keep Austin weird. I don't think we're quite there, but and what I hope will change is that I hope to see a shrinkage of the wealth gap so that more people in our city can participate in the thriving arts, cultural, culinary scenes that exist here in the city today. And I think will come roaring back post-pandemic, but it's not available to enough people because they simply don't have the incomes to participate.
I'll go next. This is Annette. I agree with the first statement. Winston-Salem has always been a great community to raise children, to have a family. It is a relatively safe community with some amenities that impact your quality of life. It has a great history of success in many areas. We don't always tap into that history to celebrate it, to make it even a better place to live. What is not true currently, in my perception, is that we don't have a community where people believe there is opportunity and opportunities for all residents. I think some people believe that there's opportunity, that there are many people who don't believe that. It's not a community that we work together beyond our silos, whether we're in nonprofits or businesses. We don't talk together, network together, and neighborhoods are not working well with each other. I would like to see in 10 years that many established neighborhoods are revitalized and restored, and that residents are engaged with each other and engaged with the city, engaged with all the opportunities, and that all of the wonderful resources we have in our city are known to our residents. We have some very outstanding things here that is distinguished in many areas, but many residents don't even know that they are here.
So I'll hop in. Are you finished in it?
Yes, I am.
Okay. I'll hop in. This is Kevin. What is true now about Winston-Salem is it is a fantastic cradle for the arts, for artists to cut their teeth, to perform, to entertain. We have a tremendous artscape, if you will, in Winston-Salem. And I hope that will be true 10 years from now, because that artscape grew as a result of having 5 Fortune 500 businesses here and multiple multimillionaires who were patrons of the arts. And that funding model for the arts has long gone to the wayside. So we have to come up with a new way to fund the arts. Something that is not true about Winston-Salem today that I hope will be true. It's not true that there is good economic mobility. And I hope that that will be true 10 years from now. That kind of is just restating what others have said in other words, but we have specifically scored at the bottom of the rung for economic mobility.
I believe that what's true about Winston-Salem is today is that it continues to get these accolades from these different marketing and branding organizations and initiatives as to how good we are, that we're up and coming. And I hope that that is still true 10 years from now. What is not true about Winston-Salem is just like what most of you already know and have said. Winston-Salem is not an equitable opportunity place to live. And I hope that that is not true in 10 years from now. I believe that is what is going to, and I said this 12 years ago when I got elected, I communicated it to the leaders in business and others at that time, that your inability and inaction to address the poverty and inequity will not save you, no matter how many accolades you get.
Councilmember Burke or Councilmember Taylor?
I will say that I think what's true about Winston-Salem today is that it is an excellent place to live, work, and relax. And everything that we say, you know, where we stand on particular issues depends on where we sit. And from my vantage point, as a man with a wife and 3 kids, I think, you know, our taxes are low. I think this is a great place for families to go and relax. I mean, if you think of Bowman Gray Stadium, Quarry Park, Salem Lake, there's so many things to do that cost little to no money. It's a great place to live. I think what's not true, I don't think we've quite wrapped our minds around, you know, how we truly provide affordable housing. You know, usually when we typically talk about things, we gear programs towards those who might be wealthy, those who might be in the middle class, but I'd like to see more of a focus on those who may be literally poor or who are trying to work to provide, to get affordable housing, who are trying to reduce poverty in the city of Winston-Salem. One of the things I think one of the biggest poverty reduction programs that we have and that we can focus on is our reentry initiatives like SOAR or Youth Build. That really gives folks a chance to get up out of poverty and provide opportunities for themselves and their families.
I believe something that's true about Winston-Salem that I hope will still be true 10 years from now is that we as leaders in the city will always continue to focus on areas of improvement as we are doing today. Something that I believe is not true and something that I hope that we will focus on going forward, and it will be true later on, is that we will have safe, affordable housing for all of our residents, and we will have economic diversity and equity throughout our city.
Thank you all very much for sharing. I hope you all don't mind if I give you a few extra minutes back in your day. We are at the end of our agenda for day 1. Just as a preview for tomorrow, what you can expect. Same time, same station, right back here together. And the focus tomorrow is really going to be on specific initiatives. We will spend the first bit of time receiving an update from city staff on the existing initiatives within the strategic plan, talking about where those are, which ones are still being worked on, and then hear from each of you if there are adjustments that you are interested in for the existing initiatives. And then we will hear again from each of you about your top 3 new initiatives. And if you don't have 3, that's okay too. But top initiatives that you are interested in discussing with your colleagues about collectively working on and having the organization work on in the coming future to add to the strategic plan. So I invite you to reflect on the conversation today and what you've heard in that conversation today, and then come back ready tomorrow to share your personal reflections on initiatives. And just as a precursor, we will be using some polling software tomorrow. I promise it won't be too complicated. If I can do it. So we tested it out. We tested it out with staff too to make sure that it was something relatively easy, so that we can really come to some collective understanding of what your collective priorities are moving forward into this next strategic plan year. So Mayor, I always invite you to close us out, to share any parting thoughts as we end day one. And I don't know if logistically you need to close the meeting specifically.
We do need to formally end the meeting. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, council members. Great participation and work today. I'll see you back here tomorrow at 1:00. I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move for approval of adjournment.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor of adjourning, please say aye.
Aye.
Is there anyone opposed? Say no. We are adjourned. Thank you. See you tomorrow.
Bye-bye.